welcome to Eclectic Kids Explore, where curious minds unite. I'm Ranger Whip.
And I'm Ranger Samfire, and welcome everybody to January and 2024. But before we even quite got to the new year, we had started rolling around the idea of exploring stories through various mediums. Ranger Whip had watched Peter Pan and had really enjoyed the Disney film version, and we got talking about how some books, maybe we could read the book and explore the movie, or there's some new graphic novels out these days that remake some classic tales. So we were starting to write down some ideas about maybe books we could do this way, and we wound up with Peter Pan was going to be our first one. But it has snowballed. So we were first talking about doing the book and the graphic novel, and he'd already done the movie. And instead, we have this list where if you go visit the website, you're going to find this book list and resource list that just goes on and on and on and on and on. Because would you even venture a guess? How many ways have we looked at Peter Pan?
Oh, probably a million.
I don't know if it's a million. I'm going to say maybe upwards of 20. I mean, we've done music, we've done performance, we've done movies, we've done so many types of books at this point. And even within that, we've done a literature study too, and we have looked at how to write at the same time, right? So it's just grown and grown and grown. And it's been really cool. I gotta say, I've really enjoyed it. Peter Pan, I had also only ever watched the Disney movie, and that was way back there. We had tried to read the original, I think in 2020, and neither one of us could get into it. And so we'd given up at the time. And it's just funny how sometimes the right book at the right moment, you know? And so we have dug into it. We have one day left in our literature study, right? We have 2 little chapters left in the book, 24 pages. We are still working on the prequel, and which I think we're maybe halfway through. And we have the sequel, which technically was written by somebody else. But otherwise, we've just gone to town and we've blown through everything, and it's been really amazing, and I've had a really good time with it.
It's been really fun.
Yeah. So for anybody who might not be familiar with the story, Ranger Whip, could you kind of summarize what is Peter Pan about?
When he meets the darling children and they go off to Neverland, where you never grow up.
Yes. It was written by J.M. Barrie, and this story was originally written as a play. It was first performed 120 years ago this year as a play. So it would not have originally even really been written for children, and yet it's become this enduring classic of children's literature. But the fact of the matter was, it didn't even become a book until 1911. The play, they say it was first performed, I believe, December 1904. And then Barrie kept tweaking it. He would rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And then he finally did put it into book format and have it published in 1911. I don't know if he continued to tweak the play after that. I'm not exactly sure, because Barrie did live for another, I think, 26 years after that. There were certain rewrites that I imagine had to do with how his audience reacted. But then there are also certain things he had to do. For example, with Peter Pan, you talked about him flying. So how was it that he told the darling children that you flew? How can you fly?
To think lovely thoughts and fairy dust.
Yes. So at first in the story, all you had to do was think lovely thoughts. And then there started to be reports that children were trying this and getting hurt. I'm not sure. I don't know if they were jumping off their roof or something and trying to think lovely thoughts and fly. I'm not sure. But there was reports that kids were getting hurt, which he did not want to have happen. So he wrote in that you also needed fairy dust, because that was a little bit harder to come by.
I'll say.
And he figured that would keep the kids safer. But this story, it's had a life of its own, even within Barrie's time. Barrie was from where?
Scotland.
Yes, Barrie was Scottish. And back in his youth, in his school days, it might have been in his college days, he had friends who would get together and act out these adventure stories. He was a huge fan of the author James Fenimore Cooper, and that was an American writer whose most famous story was The Last of the Mohicans. And so, for an interesting local touch for us, that is another story that's been made into many, many, many adaptations, TV and movie and whatnot. And one of the versions of that movie was filmed all around where we live. A lot of the different waterfalls and whatnot we go to are in scenes of that movie. But so that was kind of the beginnings of the story of Peter Pan. There was no Peter Pan character that I'm aware of at that point, but there was the adventure aspect, and this is where he was first latching onto the idea of Native Americans. Since Cooper was an American writer, Barrie Scottish, he had no personal knowledge of the indigenous peoples, but he loved the stories, and so he incorporated that. And so learning that really helped me out, because going into Peter Pan, especially listening to you watch the movie, I was kind of gritting my teeth, because all through that, how are Native people referred to? What's the term they use?
Redskins.
Yes, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I was telling you at the time, I was like, this shows how far we've come, because back then, I mean, the way they portrayed Native people, that was what I knew of them. And I remember I told you, thank goodness, we know so much more now. We are so smarter. We're so smarter. Well, that didn't sound smart.
Yeah, that's for sure.
We are so much smarter these days about all the cultures that surround us in this world, because back then my knowledge was so limited, and I just kind of absorbed that and went, okay, that's what it is. And now, yeah, it makes me grit my teeth, because that's not okay anymore. Like the way that they're presented, that's not an okay way to present people anymore. So if Peter Pan was written in contemporary society, it would look very different than it did then. And so I went in going, how has this story not been fixed at this point? Because it's still being retold. So why has it not been altered in any way? And so when I dug in and realized that I really, really don't think Barry was trying to portray Native peoples in any kind of negative way. So that helped me, because I really think to him, he just thought of it as this wild adventure and good times, and he wanted to bring that into his story. And I really don't think he meant badly. But it's important to think about those things. There's a lot of books in history that deal with topics very differently from how we would do it today. And when we read books like that, if they're maybe talking about women or people of color or different topics like that, we can look at it now and go, ugh, yeah, that's not okay these days. So we have a couple paths. We can either say, let's get rid of those books. They don't fit our society anymore. They're not okay anymore. We need to just junk them at this point and no longer support that way of thinking. Our other option is to say, let's talk about this. Let's put it under the spotlight and recognize these books are a sign of their times. That's what it was then. And we can use that for a jumping off point for a really great conversation, and then compare it to now and go, what did we know then? What do we know now? How have we grown? How do we still need to grow? So I'm never scared of books that don't necessarily stand up to how we would do things today. I think it's important. I think they can bring around very important conversations to have. And we've certainly had them, right?
Uh-huh.
This book has given us a lot of opportunity for it. So I would always say, when you hit books like that, find somebody to talk about and just think a little deeper. rather than necessarily shying away, think deeper. And you might even use it as an opportunity to do your own adaptation and go, well, how can I change this? How can I take the essence of the story and yet make it better, make it to where it holds up to today's standards, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So another sign of the times with the book, and one of the reasons why we kind of dumped it a few years ago when we tried to read it, is the language in it. 2020, when I think we were reading it, that was when I realized I was having some vision problems. And I don't know if that was part of the problem, but I just felt that the book absolutely tripped me up. I did not enjoy reading it because I felt like I stumbled constantly. So here we are, like 4 years later. My eyes are worse. And yet, honestly, I really enjoyed reading it this time. And the language is kind of part of it. It is very different. We've been doing a literature study on Peter Pan, and we've had to do vocabulary lessons. And there was one lesson one day where I was not at all surprised about the section they took. So when I was reading it, I just sort of marveled every sentence or so, going, huh, well, there's a word we don't use anymore.
Yeah.
There's a word we don't use anymore. I wonder if Ranger Whip has any idea whatsoever what I'm talking about right now.
Probably not.
There's a point where there was just so many words within that section that it's just not like blackavized.
Countenance.
Yes. These words where you just look at me and go, okay, like countenance I'm at least familiar with. Some of the words they've used, I've had to even guess. Like there's ones where I go, and I was thinking about it again last night, where I go, I don't know how to pronounce this word. Do you know how rare it is at my advanced age? And with how much I've read, to find a word I don't know how to pronounce?
Probably about 1 in a million.
It doesn't happen a lot. And yet it has happened like a handful of times reading Peter Pan. So yeah, it has very different language. Ranger Whip is reading an adaptation of it where it's the chapter book, but written in more modern language. Whereas as a read aloud, we are doing the original. And so I imagine your version's going a little bit more smoothly for you, and you can probably pronounce your words, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, whereas I just need to keep a dictionary with me kind of at all times.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate, and we had talked about this recently, not even about this, but about older children's books. I liked the fact that they don't talk down to kids. It is nice to have books that are very accessible for kids and are in their language. Yet there's also something to be said with using full language in a kid's book. And I think sometimes that helps a book stay with us, like become a classic. Because it's not talking down to a kid. It's still approaching them as if they're capable of handling literature. And I do appreciate that. I do have to say. So with that thought, then I was going to ask next, like, what makes a story last? But that might be part of it, is the quality of the writing. What do you think? What makes some stories last across the ages and not others?
Well, for one thing, they've been here for generations, and we just can't live without them.
So it's something where we kind of pass it from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
Maybe it becomes like a sentimental thing, where if it's something from my childhood, then I want you to experience it in your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
There could definitely be some of that. And I mean, we threw this thought around when we were in Eclectic Readers Club doing classics in literature. What's a classic? I'd gone into that saying, I guess it's a book that's been around about 100 years or so. I didn't think about that hard. And then as we got going that month, I really had to evaluate my opinion. And I finally came out saying, what I would say is that it's a book with some age on it, where it somehow is still relevant or important and can reach across time. Whereas not just we look at it and like with Peter Pan, it may have this old language that we don't use anymore, and it may approach certain topics in a way that we wouldn't do anymore. And yet there's something in it that still resonates with us, right? So it might be this great imaginative journey. And so many people, if you ask them what special superpower they would want, it's to fly. So there's something in this book that still, after 120 years, well, a little bit less than that for the book itself, But for the story in general, 120 years later, we still get it somehow. So it's always interesting, like what makes a book last, whereas some will kind of drift away. So then if you do have a book with staying power, why do you want to bother to adapt it? Why are there so many variations?
Well, it's kind of like how we can't live without a book, but I also think that we just it's so imaginative and fun that we think that okay, we might need more of these, and unless we just want one book, and that might become a little boring.
So you have some people, maybe that it is a beloved tale. Again, maybe it's the sentimental thing where they look back at their childhood and they're like, wow, I really love that book. Maybe not everybody's going to sit down and read it, but can I offer them a version where they can get a taste of what I love too? Right? Also, then it can be finding a way to make it accessible to multiple ages. We started at level 1, beginning readers, right? All the way up through to ones that trip me up. Yeah. So at this point, this story that has endured, people have felt the need to make it approachable, whether you're a baby sitting on your parent's knee getting read to at night, or whether you're an adult. So there's a lot of different ways to experience it now, including going to watch it on Broadway or watching a movie. So it makes it a lot of fun where it can bring it to life and let everybody enjoy it. A full family can join in and enjoy it together. So looking at all our versions, what might be a couple of your favorites?
Pure Band Live, of course. And then there's also the Fireside reading that I'm doing.
The audiobook?
And the one we're doing together.
Yeah, the one we're doing together is really neat. And that one, it's a Mina Lima edition, and it's got a lot of really cool interactive graphic elements. I've got it linked over on the page for this episode on the website. And they do a lot of other books too, I've found, and we're definitely interested in trying some more of them. I would say for me, one of my favorite versions was one that we had found that's from the United Kingdom. Our book, we bought a used copy. I think this book maybe was only published over in England. Our book had a price sticker that was in pounds. So yeah, I don't know, is this an American book at all? I don't know if it's been published over here. It's a rhyming version, so it's the full story adapted to be set in rhyme, shortened down, really beautiful illustrations. I absolutely loved it. And we have said we're going to do it again because we read it at the beginning of this, right? That was one of the very first ones we did. And we have both agreed we would like to revisit it now at the end. But I have also really, really enjoyed the original, all that language that tripped me up that I'm now really, really, really liking. And then even beyond versions of it, I think the thing I have most appreciated, one part of it being all the great conversations we've had out of our literature study, because we've had a lot of good discussions. But secondly, it's just getting the bigger, broader appreciation through looking at the author. And it's something I really recommend, is that if you have a story you love, or maybe it's a story you don't like and you're kind of wondering why it got written, or you're not liking certain parts of it, sometimes it's really good to dig in and learn about the author so it can give you a better appreciation for the story and how it came to be. Like Barrie has been a fascinating guy to learn about. He's kind of an odd duck, but I've enjoyed learning about him, and it's just given me a more well-rounded appreciation for the story. Oh, and I needed to toss you one thing, because I was reading something on the side and I kept waiting for it in the book, and I finally had to look it up today to understand. They keep talking about Captain Hook is only afraid of the sea cook, only afraid of barbecue. That is a reference to Long John Silver. Have you heard of Long John Silver?
I think I've heard of him, but I don't know exactly who he is.
I know we haven't done it, but you have heard of the book Treasure Island, right? It's written by Robert Louis Stevenson. So they were contemporaries. They never met, but they were friends. They corresponded with each other. And so barbecue and sea cook are some of the aliases of Long John Silver. And so what they're saying is Barrie's character, Captain Hook, met Stevenson's character, Long John Silver. So that's kind of fun. It's the only one he was ever afraid of was this other guy's character. So out there in the land of fiction, they met each other somewhere. So that was kind of neat. So another interesting thought has been going into this. We have loved so many of the versions, and they've held really, really true. For me, the strangest part, the one that held the least true, was I tried watching Finding Neverland, which is the story of the creation of the story of Peter Pan. And that was the one that least held water for me, as I've learned about Barrie. It is so loosely based on real life. It's kind of crazy. Whereas all the versions we've watched have very minor details switched out, right? A lot of times I'm one who is kind of the book snob. And if there's a book and a movie, I don't necessarily want to watch the movie. I've had some I've loved. Gone with the Wind, which is another book that's very sign of the times. It would have to be rewritten in today's society. But I loved it as a kid. I loved the movie. I loved the book. It was the same with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where I loved both. And then I've had books like Watership Down that was a favorite as a kid. I wanted no part of seeing the movie. So what about you? What are some other ones where you've done different versions of them?
Well, I've done the Nutcracker, where there's like the comic version, the actual book.
So many picture books.
Uh-huh.
And we go to it every year.
Yeah.
Yes, we love the Nutcracker. And then you've done the Boxcar Children that way because they have them all rewritten in graphic novels these days.
Yeah.
And there's a couple movies out.
Uh-huh. And of course they have little storybooks of them.
Yeah, we've done a whole bunch of those. So sometimes it can be great to explore some of the other variations of them. And sometimes you just want to hold dear to the one you know, right? So how about everybody else out there listening? Like, feel free to hop over to the website and leave a comment and let us know, like, what are some times where you've just wanted the original story? And what are some times where you've explored variations of the story? Or have you ever taken the time to learn about the author? Or are there maybe stories where you would like to do your own adaptation of it and kind of make it your own? Like, Ranger Whip, if you were going to adapt Peter Pan, what do you think you'd do?
I think I'd do a performance with it'd be a live version, you know? And this time, instead of it being a female this time, I'd try to find a man to play Peter Pan.
And for me, if I was going to adapt it, I guess it would be not so much an adaptation. I would go back to the original, because one thing I really loved reading the original story that I learned that I don't think is in any of the others is that the crocodile is a girl.
Uh-huh.
And that is super cool. And I kind of loved that when we read that. And that just needs to be in all versions. And why it's not, I have no idea.
Though in Peter Pan Live, she might need to eat a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a skinny one in that one.
Yeah, she looks more like a lizard.
But their set was really cool overall. That's definitely a bright, beautiful set in that one, I gotta say. So we have had a ton of fun with this. We are almost done. But it has been great, and we're definitely gonna have to dive into another book at some point and try all this again. And I hope it's just as amazing as this one has been. If y'all want to see all the many gazillion ways that we have explored Peter Pan, there is a full resource list over at the website. So if you hop on over to ekexplore.com, you're going to see links to all the different ways that we've done it. And I've mentioned over there the Mina Lima editions. And also there's a link to the novel study page that we got our Peter Pan unit from. They have a free unit over there. They also just have a really great book list. And we're already reading some other books from over on that list. Like we started The Mouse with a Question Mark Tail. And I think that one was over there on that list. There's also the PDF you can download if you want to do some activities that are related to our podcast here. And then, of course, you can come leave us a comment and your thoughts and feelings about what we've been talking about here in January. Also, I should say, if you have any ideas about next month, we're still an open book right now, right? We've been so focused on this.
Yeah.
I have no idea what we're going to do next month. Ooh. But we appreciate y'all listening. So go over to ekexplore.com, check everything out, and I guess we'll see you with something exciting in February.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.